Let's call our meeting to order, and I'll ask Mr. McCammon to call the roll.
President Baker.
Present.
Mr. Brown. Vice President Cole.
Here.
Ms. Gibbs. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Peretti.
Here.
Ms. Reyes.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask Janika Pierce-Tucker to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you don't mind. Everyone, please be upstanding.
I hope when I start, other people join in.
Don't mess it up.
All right. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, now, colleagues, as you know, our treasurer is not with us, and so we are required to appoint a member of the board as treasurer pro tem. And so is there a motion that we appoint the vice president as treasurer pro tem? And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Are you agreeable to that, Mr. Vice President?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, Controller, would you please call the roll on that appointment of treasurer pro tem?
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. All right. Controller, please note the arrival of Ms. Hudson. Good afternoon, Ms. Hudson. All right, let's now read through our agenda quickly. So we're here for one purpose, and that is to talk about the superintendent search. And so you see on the agenda here, we'll have a brief welcome and intro, and then we'll recess into executive session. We'll come back out of executive session into public session for additional discussion on process and potentially adopting a resolution. So having read through the agenda, is there a motion that we adopt it?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer? Excuse me, Mr. Controller, beg your pardon.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
President Baker.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So just very briefly, I just want to say thank you to all of you who are here with us this evening. Thank you all colleagues for being here on a night that we don't typically meet. We have Taft here with Janika Pierce-Tucker, and we have Rita McNeil-Danish. We have Professor Froelich here. We have Dr. Tombaugh here from the ESC. We have Dr. Hill and Dr. Kastner from BWP. And so unless there's anything else anyone would like to say during the opening of the meeting, I would like to ask the Vice President to make a motion, unless anyone objects to that. And, Mr. Vice President?
Here.
No, here.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is anticipated that the Board of Education will recess into executive session pursuant to Section 121.22G1 of the Ohio Revised Code to consider the appointment or hiring of a public employee or official.
Okay. Motion and a second. Hearing no objection. Mr. McCammon?
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. The board will now recess into executive session. We will return here at the conclusion of our executive session. Thank you very much. All right, we're going upstairs to the cabinet room. Okay, we are back from executive session, so thank you all for your work. Thank you all for your patience, those of you who are still in the audience. We have item 6.1, and I'd like to ask the Vice President to offer a motion.
You always catch me off guard.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, it's recommended that a resolution is offered, whereas BWP recommended 6 names to the Board of Education for its consideration, and whereas the board accepted those same candidates, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby states that it will interview the following candidates recommended by BWP: Mr. Terry Dade, Dr. Talisa Dixon, Ms. Ava Tasker Mitchell, Dr. John Stanford, and Dr. Jason Strickland.
We have a motion. Is there a second, colleagues?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Seeing none. Mr. Controller?
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Let's move on to item 7.1. And Dr. Hill, the floor is yours.
Am I on? No.
Mr. Brown?
Okay, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
BWP Consultants is happy to provide you with a final report with regards to our actions thus far relative to the superintendent search. We sent this document out so that you would have it in advance. I'm just going to summarize this document, again, in order to share with you the process that was used. After having an opportunity to do community engagement and posting vacancies in a number of locations, as a private entity, we kept, and the letter of understanding with Columbus City School Board, we kept information about the applicants as confidential. And now, as you have taken the vote to proceed, that the information regarding the candidates that you will be interviewing will be made available in a one-page summary. Based on the pre-established profile, in reviewing those applicants, we looked at 3 areas in terms of their individual information, interviews with those particular candidates, and an opportunity to do reference checks based on the recommendations that were included in their materials. Within the search process in and of itself, there were approximately 35 applicants who inquired or who contacted the consultants regarding this position. By the August 11th deadline, there were 27 applicants. 2 subsequently withdrew their applications, 18 had completed online applications, and 7 did not complete the process. So we believe in terms of the depth and breadth of the search, again, I know that that was an initial concern, that we met what our target was in terms of the number of applicants that applied. After reviewing the applications individually and collectively and interviewing a number of candidates, as you have indicated, we presented a slate. In order to assure the board of the diversity with regards to the candidates, page 4 gives you applicant demographics with regards to the pool that we selected from, the 18 who completed all the components. It is interesting to note that 9 were current superintendents, and we had a principal and various other positions of applicants. It is interesting to note that we received completed applications from 10 states across the United States. It is interesting to note that we have a variance in years of experience as administrators that range from 5 years to 43 years across the applicants who applied. It's interesting to note that we interviewed or had applications from candidates who worked in districts with sizes as small as 500 to sizes of 400,000 students in their district. We had a diversity relative to male versus female. We had diversity relative to doctorate versus just master's degree, and I don't want to say just, but a master's degree as the terminal degree. And as you know, it is not legal to classify race and ethnicity as a part of the process. We have no way of knowing what those applicants' ethnicity and race are, so that's not included with regards to the demographics. I've included in the final report the interview protocol that BWP used in terms of processing the applicants who, once we created a slate, became candidates. Once you have had an opportunity to deliberate and interview the candidates, you will be selecting semifinalists. Once you have selected semifinalists, conducted a day in the district activity in which they will have an opportunity to learn more about Columbus City Schools, meet formally and informally with members of the community, visit school sites, and have a community meeting. You will again conduct a second round of interviews in which you will ask the candidates additional, more in-depth questions. Again, those who have made it to the semifinal stage, and ask them to complete a presentation, which you will determine the topic of that particular presentation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the training session. And then following that, you will have your deliberations, and then you will have an opportunity to select a finalist. At that point in time, you will go through contract negotiations and discussions, and then be able to announce who the candidate is, the finalist is, and sign on the dotted line, and you will have had completed a successful search. Questions about the report?
Final report, you all had this in advance and had the opportunity to review it. Thank you for that executive summary. Dr. Hill, any questions, colleagues, on the final report? Thank you. Carry on.
We also sent a document entitled Columbus City School Protocols and Interviews, a protocol for interviews and other phases of the search process. So consider this a training session. The first part of the document actually talks about planning for the interview and conducting the interviews. And so again, hopefully you have read that carefully. There are some guidelines with regards to conducting interviews, one of which is that board members will be present as collectively in order to interview candidates for both the first round and the semifinalist second round. If you look at page 2, I just want to point out that there are some processing interview interactions that we want you to consider when you're doing the interviews. For example, it says board members must do more than simply hear the responses. They should actively focus on the responses and give the candidate enough feedback to encourage more in-depth answers. Try to listen not only to what is said, but how it is said. And so again, this section of the document gives you some how-tos in terms of the questioning and the interview and the process in and of itself. We've discussed at length the importance of confidentiality to the agreement of the board in terms of protocol for your procedures. We've discussed the selecting of the candidates in and of themselves. We're talking about the candidate's second visit, which will be categorized as a day in the district and will be orchestrated and organized and the logistics developed in concert with the Educational Service Center Central Office. Excuse me. The same is true of identifying the finalists through your interview process. It is suggested that whatever strategy you use for decision-making for your first interviews, to narrow that field down from the candidate pool to a semifinalist pool, that you use that same strategy when you're looking at your finalists. In this document, we have included some samples and examples of kinds of decision-making strategies that you can incur. One of my favorites is Fist to 5, and so you will see that there's an illustration of that particular process. You will be working with Professor Frolick with regards to that decision-making component. But I did want to include actual written information about strategies that you can employ in order to reach those decisions. On page 5, we talk about questions that you could ask, and then concluding that interview process. When you get to your finalists, the board will need to determine whether they want to do a site visit. BWP will be happy to help you coordinate that, but that will be a decision that the board will ultimately make for the finalist candidate, that last candidate. We recommend that if you choose to do that, that there are selective two members from the board that actually conducts that site visit. What we're finding more and more is that boards are opting not to do the site visit because they will have received so much information from the interviews and from the documents that they have that the site visit is not necessary. And again, it's not like it used to be where the whole board packed up and went to the person's locale and interviewed everyone. We think that the process that we've done in terms of vetting these candidates will suffice. However, if you determine that you do want to have a site visit for your candidate, we will be happy to assist you in establishing that. If you would look at page 1 of the attachments, that's the leadership profile, and I just want to highlight and emphasize that we have used the leadership profile consistently throughout this process. From the very beginning of the vacancy postings, through the interview process, through the selection of a slate of candidates, this has been the hallmark document. And so we encourage you to continue to use this as your screening mechanism for those candidates that you will be interviewing. The next set of pages are questions, and we've determined that you will be selecting questions. And again, you need to determine questions for the first round of interviews and the second round of interviews, as well as what type of presentation you would like for the candidate to make as a part of that second round interview. Some examples are we've had boards ask candidates to bring in samples of their communication strategies and examples of how they've written. We've asked we've asked candidates to bring in a report that they created that demonstrates student performance that they've delivered. They've asked candidates to bring in information about a plan that they're developing. So there are a number of different kinds of presentations that a candidate makes. We need to know as soon as possible what the board would like for the candidate to present if they are semifinalists so that they can begin to prepare. The candidates that you've approved for this evening are aware of the schedule and of the calendar. We gave them a heads up on that during our interview, so we will schedule on your behalf with those particular individuals for your first round of interviews, which are going to be conducted next week, I think. Okay? On page 5, I just want to point out, and again, be supported by Taft, that we listed legal guidelines for asking questions, that it is illegal, that you should not ask questions of candidates about religion, race, national origin, age, gender, marital, family status, lifestyles, disabilities, or criminal record. And again, we will also incorporate this particular piece in the community forums that your semifinalists will have an opportunity to participate in to ensure that the community is also in keeping with the appropriate kinds of questions that they should be asking of the candidate. Included in your document is a sample interview form. Actually, there are two. One is an open-ended sort of note-taking form. Again, these are designed based on your profile, so the categories are the categories that are listed in your profile. The second one is a little bit more, for some, cumbersome because it's a rating scale that then you can utilize, again, taking your leadership profile to actually numerically rate candidates' responses through the interviews. So again, you'll need to make a determination of which one or both or neither, but we did provide that as a sample for you in your training document. Page 12 talks about sample reference contact questions. We have already determined that that the search firm has already conducted these, but we wanted you to know the questions that we asked when we did the reference check. So page 12 gives you some of the questions that we asked when we were doing reference checks. Page 13 is a sample schedule of what a day in the district might look like. One of the things I would like to caution both the ESC, who will be directing that activity, as well as the board, From our community engagement activities, one concern was making sure that candidates saw more than just your best schools, that they wanted to ensure that there would be an opportunity to see the real Columbus City Schools. And so in designating and determining what sites are going to be visited, we hope you keep that component in mind relative to your school selection. We have also then included a possible sample letter for your day in the district, in which you can invite those partners who participated in both the HYA focus groups as well as our community engagement activities to come back and share their perceptions. I made it very, 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 very clear in those focus groups as well as via the Facebook live chat that the intent is to provide the community with an opportunity to give you feedback on one candidate. The community's role is not to vote for a candidate. Their role is to give you feedback. So we have suggested a structure for those focus groups and the community meetings, including the letter of invitation, a copy of the profile, an agenda template for how those focus groups could be orchestrated and organized. And we again recommend that this is an activity that board members would host and facilitate along with your mediator and possibly representatives from the ESC. I can't stress enough encouraging the community to only engage with one of your semifinalists. They don't get to vote. The vote is yours. And when they do go above and beyond that, it creates a different kind of climate and structure, because the expectation is then it begins to pit one against another. And it sets up the new superintendent for lots of issues in terms of, well, I'm not going to support you because I didn't vote, you weren't the candidate that I would pick because I saw all three or both of them. So again, it's explaining to the community, providing the rationale, and yes, Ms. Gibbs, I'm the eternal optimist. I believe that the community will rise to the occasion when they're presented with the information and the rationale, because in our experience, everyone is interested in getting a good superintendent and giving them a good start. And so this would be one mechanism in order to help along that particular concept. So you have that agenda. Then collecting the actual information. We've included samples of focus group impressions. Again, there are 2 that you can select from, that once the community, either through a focus group or the community forum, has had an opportunity to hear both the presentation of your semifinalists and have a Q&A period, that they give you feedback that says, based on the profile, we believe this candidate exhibits these skills or characteristics or doesn't exhibit these skills and characteristics. And that then the board takes those documents, reviews them, and considers them as you're doing your due deliberations with the actual candidates. So you have that, takes you up to page 21. And then finally, there's been a question about the process relative to who gets what information and how that's disseminated. And so what I shared with you were 2 articles. One article is from the Washington State School Board Directors Association, and they have an actual handbook in which they reiterate all of the things that I've just said to you about interviews, about a site visit, about a day in the district, all of those pieces. But it provides a solid rationale for the nature and the structure of those activities. And then the second article and document identifies, again, the rationale for consensus decision-making and describes 3 possible strategies that you could use in order to reach those conclusions. And so we've, again, provided you with as much material as we can. We would expect that because you're going to be holding interviews soon, that the questions will be determined, and we'll be able to get that taken care of. I will be contacting the candidates and organizing their schedule and getting back to both President Baker and Dr. Tombaugh, relative to who's coming when.
Thank you,
Question?
Dr. Hill. Are there any questions for Dr. Hill? Thank you very much for that summary. Very thorough. As always, we appreciate all the hard work that you and your team have put forth thus far. So that concludes item 7.1, and I think that's most of item 8 as well. So unless there's anything else for the good of the order this evening, we c-
Reminder out so that we do our part before our next meeting, maybe a reminder email for time and dates.
right?
Solidify and
Keep in mind that you should have 11th, 12th, and September dates on your calendars. Those are at 5:30. 11, 12, 13 September.
No one says it that way. September 11th, 12th, and 13th.
The 11th, the 12th, and the 13th of September, 5:30. And we will be in touch on those other details that Dr. Hill mentioned, and we'll be working with ESC and Professor Froelich on that. So we'll be in touch shortly, Dr. Hill.
Just a reminder that you do have the calendar that we developed in June, which has all of those dates listed, so if you want to go back and double check to see, and we are right on point in terms of the calendar that was designed in June that people had questions about.
Ms. Gibbs?
And so, can you remind me, what are the dates for the community? These overlap the dates for the community meetings about the facilities task force, is that correct?
I don't have
Mr. Varner,
those
can you give us those
In
dates? Do you
front of
have
me. Is that
those?
something we can do offline?
Yes.
Yes, we can, but I
Okay.
just want to make sure.
Yep, very
Clear
good.
that.
Very close.
Is there anything else for the good of the order this evening, colleagues? If not, let's move into item 9. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded. Mr. McCammon?
Ms. Hudson,
Yes.
Mr. Peretti,
Yeah.
Ms. Reyes,
Yes.
Ms. President Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
President Cole,
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, colleagues.